"There's only one way we're going to find that out, and we all know what it is," said Atrax, who seemed less concerned about the situation. "Destroyed in war, toppled by a swarm of monsters, toppled by one giant monster, leveled by a giant magical explosion. Hell, I've even seen a set of ruins that was slammed flat by one of the gods, according to the scholars that were studying it. At this point, I'd be more surprised if this city fell into ruins in a way I hadn't seen already. Job's the same basic format every time. Show up, establish a base, check the ruins and surroundings for anything dangerous, and then take care of the dangerous things. We've even got part of it done already. We know there's goblins around we'll have to deal with. I say we get camp set up, and then, if the goblins don't launch another assault tomorrow, that'll thin their numbers enough for us to be able to take the time to go clear the ruins themselves. Then we draw their attention to force an attack." Graphus and Frise both nodded in agreement. "Sounds like as good a plan as any," said Frise. "I think we ought to take the time to set up a better defensive line for the camp on the side facing the Goblin Woods," added Graphus. "It'll be easier to defend against them, even if it's something as simple as sharpened stakes placed as a barrier." "I can put my new earthworks skill to use and help out with that," offered Xander. While he wasn't looking forward to another clash with the goblins in the area, it wasn't looking like he had much choice. If it was going to happen, he might as well prepare as much as he could, and there were only two things he could think of: making more explosives and fortifying the area. "Aye, that would indeed be helpful. Atrax, I say you and myself go commandeer some of the workers and put them to making stakes and barriers. Xander, you can use that skill, and Frise, do you think you can scout the area and see how close the main body of the horde is? Of course, you think a ranger and a druid of the forest can't sneak around some goblins?" Frise said in mock offense that there was even a question of whether she could scout out the goblins or not. "Well, we'd best get to it. Let's go put some of these slackers to work." Atrax sounded resigned to the drudgery of pre-battle prep work. Soon, Graphus and Atrax returned with several of the stronger-looking members of the caravan. Frise had already left for the woods to scout. The workers were put to the task of downing nearby trees and stripping the branches for stakes. Xander would pump half his mana into earthworks and create a long section of trench in front of the stakes, then wait for the skill to come off cooldown. The displaced earth was moved behind the stakes to create a berm and provide additional height advantage to the defenders. The addition of skills to the work made the process significantly faster than I would have taken on Earth. After only 2 hours or so, a defensive line had been created between the camp and the forest. Xander pondered what else he could do to better prepare for the upcoming fight. The realization that he could create something that would launch his grenades or fire bottles further than he could throw them struck him as the most immediate concern he could improve upon. After thinking over how he might design such an object, he settled on using a crossbow body as the basis for it. What he ended up with, after several iterations and tests with empty grenade bodies and empty jars, was what looked like a crossbow mated with a pipe. The crossbow body was much the same as a standard crossbow, but where a groove would be set for a bolt to rest was instead a tube, which a grenade or a fire bottle could be placed in. Xander had opted to use steel cable for the crossbow string since he was able to create it, and he hoped it would provide more potential power, or at least make it less likely to snap. The strings themselves were attached to a small mesh made of more cable that the projectile would rest against. The first test, using just a single string of steel cable, had shattered the glass he had tested it with. The pipe was slit down the middle on both sides where the string would need to move. A small hand-cranked winch provided a method for Xander to pull the string back to its tensioned position. To fire, he would simply pull the switch on the ratchet, allowing the string to pull itself forward from the position it had been winched to and fire the projectile. Xander found that he was able to launch a grenade about 100 feet with his new bastardized crossbow, and a fire bottle went about 150 feet, a definite improvement over a hand throw. He wasn't sure yet what to call it besides ugly, though. Later that day, Frise returned, once again riding a stag. She made her way around the stakes and trench to reach the camp before hopping down and releasing the deer back into the woods. She looked annoyed, which Xander assumed meant she did not carry good news. "We're quite close to the main population," she said, "and there are definitely enough of them for us to be concerned about another attack once they discover us here." Damn, cursed Atrax. There's no way we can enter the ruins then until we thin them out. Anyone have a plan other than what we've already come up with? Frozay shook her head, and Graphis shrugged. I don't, said Xander, but I do have another idea. If I can find a long enough rope or enough sections to tie together, I can lay them out on the field and cast reactivity on it. Atrax nodded. Sounds good. We should all prepare for a fight tomorrow, so if there's something you need for it, you'd best start now. Graphis, Atrax, and Frozay wandered off to inform the camp of the impending battle tomorrow, leaving Xander in the field. He decided to go ahead and get to work on his idea. The process of laying the rope out on the field was simple enough, though it had taken a little convincing to allow various members of the caravan to allow him to take so much. He laid it out on the field in a zigzag pattern, with a rough spacing of 15 feet between rows. It didn't take him long at all to complete, and not much mana either. Casting reactivity, however, drained almost the entirety of his mana. Oof, that's unpleasant, Xander groaned. His head did not appreciate such a massive usage of mana all at once. The worst part was that he knew he'd need to keep spending mana through the rest of the day to make a good stock of grenades and Molotovs. The rest of the day was indeed a slog of creation for Xander. Grenade after grenade and then Molotov after Molotov were churned out. Weapons were handed out to those who could use them. All the members of the caravan were preparing for the fight to come. Even the researchers had been given bows this time. Aiming wouldn't be much of an issue with the density of goblins that would be appearing. Xander made time to carve runes into Graphis's shield, strengthening the already formidable armature. Dinner was a quick affair, and a heavier-than-usual watch was set, though the mercenaries were left off the roster for it, considering the effort they were expected to put forth the next day. Xander found it hard to sleep when the time came for him to retire to his tent and sleeping bag. Anxiety over how the next day would play out chasing his thoughts in circles around his mind. While the last encounter with the goblins, and how his guildmates had handled it, had inspired confidence in their abilities in Xander, he was still concerned about the number of goblins. Would 3 professional guild members and 1 newbie, along with a group of people without combat-oriented classes, be enough? He supposed it would have to be. The only thing that was keeping him from panicking was that no one else seemed concerned. The goblins seemed to be treated as if they were a nuisance, albeit a somewhat dangerous one. The morning came, as usual, with the sounds of the people around him waking, leaving their tents, or cooking food. Xander rolled out of his sleeping bag and made his way out of his tent. The sound his zipper made still drew eyes, despite the fact that the people around him had been hearing it for nearly 2 weeks. Xander supposed he couldn't blame them. He hadn't seen a zipper anywhere else in this world. He found his guildmates performing similar activities to the rest of the camp. After breakfast, a plan was established. Atrax, Graphis, and Xander would take a central position in the defensive line. Frozay would be the one leading the goblins to them. The rest of the line would be manned by the members of the caravan capable of swinging a weapon. Those that couldn't would be behind them with bows, or even just throwing rocks if they were unlucky enough to have been unable to get their hands on a bow. It was decided by a large majority that it was best to get the task done with as soon as possible, and so the camp was emptied as the line was manned. Frozay was sent off, once more riding her stag. Half an hour later, Frozay could be heard getting closer, making loud whoops and cursing at the goblins who were chasing her. Soon, the growling and howling of the goblins could be heard too, a chorus of bestial savagery. Frozay, riding her stag, burst forth from the boundary of the woods, followed not long after by a veritable tide of green. Xander was startled at the sheer mass of goblins that had come forth. Frozay turned her stag to the left and quickly made her way behind the defensive line before dismounting and hurrying to her position behind Graphis. The tide of green had made it halfway through the clearing between the defenders and the forest, and Xander decided it was time to put his trap to use. He willed reactivity to work, and the rope the goblins had been trampling exploded. As the rope didn't provide any shrapnel, Xander didn't expect too many casualties, and this held true. What he had forgotten, however, was that he had gained the explosive effect skill. While the rope only killed a small number of the horde, it was enough to trigger 2 instances of explosive effect. The average goblin was roughly 40 pounds, which meant that those two goblins suddenly exploded as if they had had 10 pounds of lead picrate detonated inside of them. This caused a massive amount of carnage, as the blast itself shredded the goblins nearby the site of the detonation, and the bone shrapnel penetrated goblins even further out. It was on this day that Xander learned that explosive effect could trigger itself. The two goblins that had originally detonated caused several more to detonate, which caused even more to detonate, the density of the swarm providing the perfect environment for the skill. In the blink of an eye, half of the goblins that had emerged so far from the forest had been turned into a red smear on the churned ground. The chain of explosions had left many of the surrounding goblins dazed, and the defenders' ears were ringing. The press of goblins still rushing from the forest began to push the front of the goblins' assault forward again, though. Seeing that the goblins were still coming, Xander began to put his bastardized crossbow to work. Atrax and Fraze similarly began to launch arrows and fire spells at the rushing goblins. A long-fused grenade launched itself from the tube on Xander's crossbow and detonated within the mass of goblins. The carnage wrought by the grenade launched another series of secondary explosions across the battlefield. Between the area of effect skills that Atrax and Fraze were able to put forth and Xander's apparent advantage over densely packed enemies, very few goblins even made it to the defensive line for Graphus or the other defenders to deal with. The flow of goblins ebbed quickly, and soon the few survivors were scampering back into the woods. A cheer went up from the defenders, who were happy the fighting had been so light for them. "I doubt they'll be coming back anytime soon," commented Atrax. "I think we've brought their numbers down enough that they'll be able to subsist on other food sources." "That was impressive work with the rope and the bombs," said Graphus. "I don't think I've ever seen someone take so many goblins out with a single skill. Now go out there and touch some of them and see what horrifying thing happens this time." Fraze was far too enthusiastic about the effects of Heaven's bounty. Xander personally found the skill to be quite disturbing, albeit useful. All right, I'll go do it. I don't like it, but it is nice to get a reward for my work." Xander walked around the stakes and trench and made his way to the field of corpses. The explosions had been terribly effective, and he found more parts of goblins in some areas than he did whole goblins. He nudged corpses with his boot until he felt Heaven's bounty take hold. Again, a vortex began to pull corpses towards it. The number was much larger this time than when it had created the orb, and Xander wondered if the ability was commensurate to how many enemies he had slain in a fight, or if it depended on what item the ability was creating. The skeleton hadn't been affected in quite such a way, but it had also turned into an item that was of the same material as itself. The sickening crunching and squelching of the vortex died down, and a mask took form in it. It appeared to be made of a dark, bronze-like metal, and was the shape of a grimacing skull. For some reason, it made Xander uncomfortable to look at. He reached down and picked it up anyways before opening his status. "You have defeated enemies. For defeating over 100 enemies with a single usage of a skill, you have been granted the title Hordebreaker Artificer leveled to 6, Soldier leveled to 5, Demolitionist leveled to 4. Heaven's bounty has created an object. Mask of Doom, Mask of Doom. Allows the wearer to cast Aura of Fear at 0 cost. Aura of Fear. Non-allied targets within 50 feet find the caster to be terrifying. Artificer level 6 skills, improved creation. Created materials do not decay away from creator until 24 hours have passed. Soldier level 5 skills, unstoppable force, increases strength, scales with level, rally point, allies within 30 feet of you become immune to the effects of fear-based skills. Mana cost, medium, cooldown, 1 hour, duration, 30 minutes, demolitionist level 3 skills, Maker's Ward. Become immune to the effects of your own demolitionist skills and explosives you have created. Demolitionist level 4 skills, esoteric explosives. Created explosives can now harm incorporeal or completely magical beings. If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.